There is something that nobody has ever told you about the person who hurt you. Something so precise, so specific, and so deeply buried beneath the surface of everything that happened between you two that once you hear it, you will never be able to unsee it. I need you to understand something before we go any further. What you are about to learn is not a theory. It is not a comforting lie dressed up as psychology. It is the raw, unfiltered truth about what was actually happening inside the mind of the narcissist in your life while you were falling apart trying to figure out what you did wrong. Because here is the thing that keeps people stuck for years, sometimes decades. You walked away from that relationship believing a story that was handed to you, carefully constructed and deliberately placed inside your mind like a splinter you cannot reach. The story said you were not enough. The story said you were too much trouble. The story said they simply stopped caring, moved on easily, and barely thought about you after it was over. Every single part of that story is a lie. And today, that lie ends. What narcissists secretly think about you is not indifference. It is not boredom. It is not the casual dismissal of someone who was never that important to them. What they secretly think about you is something far more complicated, far more disturbing, and ultimately far more powerful once you understand it. They think about you with obsession. They think about you with calculation. And buried beneath all of that, beneath the cruelty and the coldness and the silence, they think about you with something that would humiliate them to ever admit out loud. They think about you with fear, not the kind of fear that shows on a person's face. Not panic or trembling, but a deep, quiet, structural fear. The kind that reorganizes a person's entire behavior from the inside without them ever acknowledging it consciously. And understanding that fear is the key that unlocks everything. Every confusing moment, every inexplicable withdrawal. Every time they looked at you with contempt when all you had done was love them. It all traces back to this one hidden truth. But before we go there, I need to say something directly to you right now, because some of you listening to this are in the middle of it. Some of you are not on the other side yet. Some of you are still waking up at 3 a.m, replaying conversations, wondering what you said wrong, wondering if they are thinking about you, wondering if any of it was real. It was real. Your confusion is real. And your pain is completely legitimate. What was not real was the version of the relationship they allowed you to see. What was not real was the mask they wore so flawlessly that even you, someone who loved them more closely than almost anyone else, could not see through it until cracks began to appear. And those cracks did not appear because you failed. Those cracks appeared because you were getting too close to something they could not allow you to reach. Think about the beginning. Think about how it felt in those early days when everything was electric and overwhelming and almost too good, when they made you feel chosen, seen, like the most important person in any room you walked into together. That feeling was not an accident. That feeling was architecture. It was built with precision by someone who needed you to feel exactly that way so that you would stay close enough to be useful, and so that when the warmth was eventually withdrawn, you would spend everything you had trying to get back to it. That period, the golden phase, the idealization, it was not love. It was a construction project. They were not falling for you. They were installing you, building the emotional infrastructure they would later depend on and later destroy. And here is the part that most people never get to hear, the part that changes the entire shape of the story. During that idealization phase, while they were making you feel like everything, they were also quietly cataloging you. They were learning your wounds, mapping your insecurities, filing away every vulnerability you trusted them with, every fear you whispered in a private moment, every place inside you that still hurt from something that happened long before they arrived. They were not doing this because they loved you and wanted to understand you. They were doing it because they were preparing, not consciously, not in some villainous, deliberate way, but on an instinctive, survival-driven level. Because the narcissist does not experience relationships the way you do. They do not enter a relationship seeking genuine connection. They enter a relationship seeking regulation, seeking supply, seeking the external validation that their damaged internal architecture cannot produce for itself. And you, with your warmth and your empathy and your extraordinary capacity to make people feel understood, you were the richest source of that regulation they had ever found. That is not a small thing. That is not flattery dressed up as psychology. That is the literal truth of why they pursued you so intensely. You were not chosen randomly. You were chosen specifically. You were chosen because something about who you are, your emotional depth, your intuition, your willingness to give registered to them on a deep unconscious level as someone who could fill the void that they have been running from their entire lives. And for a while it worked. For a while you gave and they took and the system functioned. But here is where everything shifted.
Here is the moment the entire dynamic began to turn.
The moment you started becoming real to them, the moment you stopped being a perfect reflective surface and started being a full human being with your own needs, your own perceptions, your own quiet and growing awareness that something underneath all of this was not right. That is the moment the fear began. And that fear, that carefully hidden, never acknowledged, deeply structural fear, is what we are going to pull completely into the light in the next part of this. Because what a narcissist secretly fears about you is not your anger. It is not your ability to expose them. It is something far more intimate than that, and understanding it will not just explain the past, it will free you from it entirely. Let us talk about fear, real fear, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that does not come with a racing heart or wide eyes, but the kind that quietly governs every single decision a person makes without them ever sitting down and naming it. The narcissist in your life was operating from this kind of fear every single day. And the target of that fear, the thing they were most terrified of in the entire relationship, was not losing you. It was not being abandoned. It was not even being exposed to the outside world, though that fear exists too. The deepest, most protected, most ferociously defended fear inside a narcissist is the fear of being truly seen, not seen as successful, not seen as charming or impressive or desirable, seen as they actually are underneath all of that, seen as empty, seen as hollow, seen as someone who has been performing a self for so long that they no longer have access to a real one, and you, without doing anything wrong, without even trying, were the greatest threat to that secret they had ever encountered. Here is why that matters so much. Most people in a narcissist's life never get close enough to the real thing to be dangerous. Colleagues, acquaintances, even casual friends, they see the curated version, the confident one, the charming one, the one who always has the right answer and the impressive story and the magnetic presence that makes a room turn toward them. Those people are safe. They are consumers of the performance. And as long as they keep consuming it and reflecting it back with admiration, the narcissist can function. But you were different. You were not a casual observer. You were inside. You were in the private moments. You were there in the morning before the mask was fully assembled. You were there in the arguments when the script broke down and something raw and uglier surfaced. You were there in the quiet moments when the performance had nowhere to go and what was left underneath was visible, at least partially, if only for a second. And on some level, they knew it. They could feel you getting close. Not because you were aggressive or confrontational or deliberately trying to unmask them, but because genuine intimacy the kind you were naturally capable of offering, is itself a form of seeing. When you love someone with real attentiveness, when you pay close attention not just to what they say, but to what they do not say, when you are the kind of person who notices the gap between someone's words and their eyes, you become a mirror that shows things they cannot control. And a narcissist cannot survive an honest mirror. So what did they do? They did what every cornered, frightened creature does. They attacked the threat, not with their fists, not always with obvious cruelty, at least not at first. They attacked with subtlety. They attacked with confusion. They attacked by making you doubt the very instrument you were using to see them clearly, which was your own perception. Every time you noticed something that did not add up, they told you that you were imagining it. Every time your instincts flagged something as wrong, they reframed it as your insecurity. Every time you came close to naming what you were sensing, they flooded the space with so much noise, so much drama or deflection or sudden warmth that you lost the thread entirely and came back to them grateful for the reconnection. That was not confusion. That was strategy, not the kind of strategy a person sits down and plans on paper, but the kind of instinctive, survival-driven strategy that the narcissist's entire psychology has been organized around since long before they ever met you. And understanding this reframes everything. Because if you have spent any time since that relationship ended blaming yourself for not seeing it sooner, for staying too long, for going back too many times, for believing the apologies that were never quite real, I need you to understand something important right now. You were not naive. You were not weak. You were not foolish. You were being systematically managed by someone whose entire psychological architecture was built around one singular goal, which was making sure you never clearly saw what was actually there. The confusion you felt was not a reflection of your intelligence. It was evidence of how sophisticated the operation against your clarity actually was. And there is something else happening beneath all of this that almost nobody talks about, something that sits right alongside the fear and actually intensifies it. Envy. Narcissistic envy is one of the most documented and least understood forces in this entire psychological landscape. And it is crucial to understanding what they secretly think about you, because here is the devastating irony at the center of every relationship with a narcissistic person. They chose you for your gifts. They were drawn to your warmth, your emotional depth, your ability to genuinely connect, your capacity for joy, your realness. All the things that made you magnetic to them were the very things they could only perform and never actually feel. And so alongside the need, alongside the dependency, there lived this constant corrosive envy. When you laughed without self-consciousness, they envied it. When you cried openly without calculating the effect, they envied it. When you loved without keeping score, when you were vulnerable without strategy, when you existed in your own emotional experience with a naturalness and ease they have never known and can never access, they envied every single second of it. And envy in a narcissist does not look like what you might expect. It does not look like admiration gone wrong. It looks like contempt. It looks like criticism. It sounds like you are too emotional, or you are too sensitive, or you make everything so dramatic. Those were not observations. Those were not feedback from someone who cared about your growth. Those were expressions of envy wearing the costume of superiority. Every time they minimized something real in you, they were not trying to help you. They were trying to diminish the thing in you that reminded them of everything they could not be. And now here is where it gets truly important. Now here is the layer that changes not just how you understand the past, but how you understand yourself going forward. You need to hear this next part slowly. You need to let it land completely before you move past it, because this is the piece that most people in your position never get access to. And it is the piece that has the most power to change the way you carry yourself, from this moment forward. The narcissist was dependent on you, not in the way healthy people are dependent on each other, not in the mutual reciprocal way that real love creates between two people who have chosen each other freely, but in a desperate, consuming, structural way that they would rather destroy the entire relationship than ever admit to. Their dependency on you was not a sign of love, it was a sign of architecture. Think about what it actually means to have no stable internal source of self-worth. Think about what it means to wake up every single morning and have no reliable sense of your own value unless someone outside of you is providing it. No inner voice that says you are enough. No quiet well of self-regard that you can draw from when the world gets hard. Nothing solid at the center, just a performance that needs an audience to feel real. That is the narcissist's daily reality. And you, with your consistency and your loyalty and your seemingly bottomless capacity to give, you were the most reliable audience they had ever had. You were not a partner to them. You were a power source. And every single emotional state they induced in you, every argument they manufactured, every cold silence they deployed, every moment of sudden warmth followed by inexplicable withdrawal, none of it was random. All of it was functional. When they raged at you and you responded with fear or panic, that fear fed something in them. It confirmed their power. It confirmed that they existed, that they had impact, that they mattered in the world. When they went cold and distant and you chased them, your pursuit confirmed their value. When they charmed you back after a period of cruelty and you melted with relief and gratitude, your relief was the supply. Every emotional transaction in that relationship was running in one direction, from you to them. And the terrifying precision of it, the thing that is so hard to accept once you see it clearly, is that they needed your pain just as much as they needed your admiration, because both of those things confirmed the same thing for them, that they had power over you, that they were significant, that they were real. Now contrast this with who you actually are. You are someone who generates warmth from the inside. You are someone whose capacity for love does not require an external audience to exist. You feel things genuinely. You connect authentically. You show up in relationships with a wholeness that the narcissist can sense but never replicate. That contrast, the contrast between your natural internal richness and their hollow dependency, is the engine of everything that went wrong. Because you cannot be in a genuine relationship with someone whose primary relationship is with your reaction to them. You cannot build something real with someone who is not experiencing you as a person, but as a function. And no matter how hard you tried, no matter how perfectly you loved, no matter how perfectly you loved, no matter how much you adjusted yourself and softened your edges and silenced your needs to make space for theirs, you could never fix that fundamental mismatch. Because the problem was never you. The problem was the architecture. And here is something that will sit with you in a new way once you truly absorb it. The discard or the de-evaluation or the slow erosion of everything good between you, it was not a verdict on your worth. It was a system failure. At some point, the dynamic stopped working the way it was designed to. At some point, you started asking questions that did not have comfortable answers. At some point, your needs became too visible, or your perceptions became too accurate, or your growing awareness of the pattern became too threatening to manage with the usual tools. And when a narcissist can no longer manage you, when the usual tactics stop producing the expected responses, they do not reflect, they do not grow, they do not sit with the discomfort and ask themselves hard questions about who they are and what they are doing. They escalate, they punish, they find new supply, or they discard before they can be truly seen. And they frame it always in a way that places the failure in you. Because the alternative, acknowledging that they are the source of the collapse, would require them to look at the very thing their entire personality has been constructed to avoid, which is themselves. But here is what they took with them when they left. And this is the part I need you to sit with. They took the memory of you not fondly, not with the warmth you deserved, but obsessively, because you were not just a relationship to them. You were the closest any person had ever come to seeing through the constructed self to the real one underneath. And that closeness, that terrifying proximity to the truth of who they are, does not leave a person easily, even a narcissist, especially a narcissist. You haunt them in a way the new person never will. The new supply is safe. The new supply sees only the performance and reflects it back on demand. But you saw something the performance could not fully cover, and they know it. They know that somewhere inside you is a knowledge of them that no amount of rewriting or reputation management or new relationships will ever fully erase. That knowledge is yours. It always was. And now here is where we talk about what that means for you, because this is not about them anymore. This has not been about them for longer than you realize. Every piece of understanding you are building right now, every layer of clarity you are adding to your picture of what actually happened, is not an exercise in obsessing over someone who hurt you. It is an act of reclamation, because the most insidious thing a narcissistic relationship does is not the obvious damage. It is not the arguments or the silent treatments or even the betrayals. The most insidious thing it does is make you a stranger to yourself. It installs so much doubt, so much second guessing, so much noise between you and your own instincts that you stop trusting the most important thing you have, which is your own internal knowing. The gaslighting did not just distort specific memories. It distorted your relationship with your own mind, and rebuilding that relationship, restoring trust in your own perception, learning to hear your instincts again without immediately questioning them. That is the real work. Not forgiving them, not understanding them, not even fully explaining them. The real work is finding your way back to yourself. That journey starts with one specific realization that we are going to go into completely in the next section, because it is the realization that changes not just how you see the past, but how you walk into every relationship for the rest of your life. Here is section 4, work. Here is the realization, the one that changes everything, the one that the narcissist spent the entire relationship trying to make sure you never arrived at. You were never the problem. You were the solution they could not handle. Read that again and let it settle somewhere deeper than your mind. Let it settle in your body, in the place where all the self-doubt has been living, in the place where every criticism they ever aimed at, you took up residence and started paying rent. You were not too sensitive. Sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a form of intelligence that most people spend their entire lives trying to develop and never fully reach. You were not too emotional. Emotion is not weakness. It is data. It is the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, reading the environment, registering what is real, signaling when something is wrong. And your emotions were signaling the truth about that relationship long before your conscious mind was ready to hear it. You were not too needy. You had needs, normal, human, legitimate needs for honesty and consistency and genuine presence, needs that any healthy person would not only meet but celebrate in a partner. The only reason those needs felt like too much was because you were bringing them to someone whose entire survival strategy depended on you having none. Every label they put on you was a projection. Every flaw they diagnosed in you was a confession. Every moment they made you feel like the broken one was a moment they were offloading their own fracture onto someone generous enough to carry it. And you carried it for longer than you should have had to, with more grace than the situation deserved, and with a loyalty that, directed at the right person, would have built something extraordinary. That loyalty was never the problem. That capacity for love was never the problem. The address you sent it to was the problem. And you could not have fully known that at the time, because the address was disguised. The person who received your love was wearing a face specifically designed to look like exactly what you needed. That is not your failure. That is the sophistication of the trap. But here is what is true now. Now you know what the trap looks like. Now you have seen the architecture from the inside. Now you understand the idealization phase, not as something that was done to you out of genuine feeling, but as the first move in a dynamic that was never designed to end well for you. And that knowledge is armor, not the cold, closed-off armor of someone who has decided never to trust again, not the brittle protection of someone who has confused self-preservation with self-isolation, but the warm, grounded, eyes-open armor of someone who knows what real love looks like because they have seen what the imitation looks like up close. You will not be fooled the same way twice, not because you are harder now, but because you are clearer. And clarity is the one thing a narcissist cannot operate around. Think about what it actually means to move through the world with the level of emotional intelligence you have. Think about what you are capable of in a relationship with someone who actually deserves it. Think about what it looks like when your attentiveness lands on someone who welcomes it instead of weaponizing it. When your empathy meets someone who reciprocates instead of exploits. When your vulnerability is treated as the gift it actually is instead of the entry point for someone else's control. That version of love exists. It is real, and you are not disqualified from it because of what happened to you. If anything, what happened to you has made you more prepared for it, not less. Because you now know the difference between someone who pursues you with intensity because they genuinely see you and someone who pursues you with intensity because they have identified you as a valuable resource. You know the difference between warmth that is consistent and warmth that is intermittent. You know the difference between a partner who can sit in discomfort with you and a partner who manufactures discomfort to keep you off balance. You know the difference between being loved and being managed, and that knowledge, that hard-won, painful, expensive knowledge is yours permanently. Nobody can take it from you, not even them. Now let us talk about the thing that keeps most survivors of narcissistic relationships stuck longer than anything else. It is not the memories. It is not even the trauma bonding, though that is real and it is powerful and it deserves its own conversation. The thing that keeps people stuck the longest is the unanswered question, the question that sits at the center of everything, the one that replays in the quiet moments, the one that resurfaces every time you think you have finally made peace with what happened. The question is simply this: did any of it mean anything to them? Was there ever a single genuine moment? Was there ever a single genuine moment? Was there ever a version of what they felt for you that was real? And I am going to answer that question right now, not to protect you from the truth, but to give you the most honest and accurate version of it that psychology actually supports. There were probably moments where the performance dropped far enough that something underneath it, something closer to actual feeling, surfaced briefly. Moments where they looked at you and registered, however fleetingly, that you were extraordinary, that what you offered them was unlike anything they had found before. Those moments were real in the sense that they happened, but they were not love in the way you understand love. They were recognition without the capacity, or reciprocation. They were the emotional equivalent of standing outside a warm house, pressing your hand against the glass, feeling the heat from the other side, but never being able to go in. They could feel the edges of what you had to offer. They could not receive it, not because you were not enough, but because receiving real love requires a self that is present enough to be changed by it. And the narcissist, for all their intensity and performance and apparent confidence, does not have reliable access to that self. They never did, and that is not your fault. That is their tragedy. And the moment you stop carrying their tragedy as if it were your own, is the moment something inside you shifts permanently. Because you have been walking around with a weight that was never yours to carry, a question that was never yours to answer, a wound that was inflicted on you by someone who was already wounded long before you arrived, someone who passed their damage forward because they had never done the work of stopping it with themselves. You stopped it. Maybe not on the first attempt, maybe not on the second, but you are here right now doing the exact thing that breaks the cycle, which is understanding it. And understanding it is not just intellectual. It is not just adding information to your knowledge of psychology. Understanding it at the level you are understanding it right now, in your body, in the part of you that recognizes truth when it lands, that is transformation. That is the ground shifting under the version of yourself that still wondered if you were the problem. That version is done now. And what comes next is not a harder, more guarded version of you. What comes next is a more rooted version. A version that knows its own worth, not because someone else confirmed it, but because you have walked through the exact fire designed to destroy it, and you are still standing. The narcissist studied you, mapped you, used everything they learned about you against you. And with all of that, with every psychological tool at their disposal, with every strategy their damaged architecture could produce, they still could not diminish the most essential thing about you, which is that you are someone who loves with their whole self. In a world full of people performing connection, that is not a weakness. That is the rarest and most valuable thing a human being can be. They knew it. That is precisely why they came for it. That is precisely why, no matter what they told you, no matter what story they left you with, no matter how long you carried the weight of their verdict on your worth, the truth was always the same. You were never too much. You were always exactly enough. And somewhere, in whatever distorted, defended, performance-driven version of an inner life they have, the narcissist knows that too. They just needed you never to know it. Now you do,